on.
All good.
Yes.
We got thumbs up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the publishing panel. To those watching from home, hello. I am very excited to be joined by a panel of publishing experts that run the gamut from traditional, magazine, and independent publishing. My name is Wiley Wei-Chun Ho, and I'm with the Federation of BC Writers. And you probably, for those here, you've probably seen us all over the place, with coffee, with the photo booth, and everyone is welcome to try to come and see us at the booth or check us out at the Federation of BC Writers. We are a very welcoming bunch, and we have tons of programming from novice writers all the way to very advanced published authors. So without further ado, let's begin. And I just would like to acknowledge that this festival takes place on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, on which lands I feel very privileged to be able to work, live, and play on. And I would also like to give special thanks to the Federation of BC Writers sponsoring this event, and to Connects UBC, the UBC Library, and UBC Robson Square for their sponsorship, which made this space available to us. Also, a huge round of applause to all the staff, volunteers who are making this festival happen. It continues to be Canada's largest free lit festival. I think it's amazing. Everything is free today. And I hope that you've been able to catch some of the events earlier today. There's been some fantastic ones. My brain is actually a bit full at the moment. And if you haven't been able to, I think they're being recorded for viewing at your leisure on YouTube. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our lovely panel, and apparently a slightly odd panel, I'm told. But you'll have to judge for yourselves.
Let's just see that.
First up, we have Sylvia Skeen, who is the Executive Director of Magazine Association of BC since 2011. And Sylvia advocates for greater appreciation and support of the magazine industry at the local, provincial, and federal levels. As internship coordinator, she also supports programs such as Internship Subsidy Program, and she co-partnered a survey report on the state of diversity, inclusion, and equity in the Canadian magazine industry. In her previous career, Sylvia worked as a library assistant and technician, mostly in media, and wrote a humorous advice column for Library Text.
I did.
That's interesting.
I did for a couple of years.
Yeah, welcome. And in the middle, we have Richard Cowenhoven, who is
Thank you.
from Hemlock Printers, and he is the president and CEO. He oversees the strategic direction and growth of Hemlock and its subsidiary organizations. Richard has, 35 plus, it says here, years of hands-on print industry experience in a number of roles, from production to department leadership, and for the past 15 years as a senior executive within the organization. As a second-generation family member in the business, Richard is guided by the values that are the foundation of Hemlock's success since the company's founding in 1968. So welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thirdly, this is Anne Boyer. She is not Don Gorman, as printed in the brochure. Don couldn't join us today. He's not in town. So Annie very graciously stepped in, and I'm delighted to say, I'm just going to read her bio. Annie is the director of marketing for 3 sister book publishing companies, Douglas and McIntyre, Harbor Publishing, and Nightwood Editions. She has also served as the managing editor of Freehand Books and was a co-founder of Read Alberta, an online initiative with a mandate to connect readers, booksellers, publishers, and libraries. She now lives in Calgary, but obviously she can't stay away from the West Coast. So welcome, everyone.
Yeah, great initiative that Read Alberta.
Yeah, I think we have a great representation of different specialists across publishing and from books and magazines and online stuff too. I think I'm really excited to talk with them because as both a reader and a writer, I feel like I'm on the creative side of things, and I think today so far we've been listening to the storytelling and the craft of telling, and now we get the business of writing. And I think this is very, very important because how else are we going to get our words out to everyone? So I've prepared a list of questions for you that are really from the vantage point of someone who is both a reader and a writer, like I say. And I think I represent many of us here when I ask some of these questions. And I think, maybe I'll just get started. So the first one I have is, what are some of the major shifts you've seen since the beginning of the pandemic or since the pandemic with publishing, whether it's magazines, independent publishing, or traditional publishing? Did you want to start us off?
Sure. I mean, with magazines, there was already a move towards digital content, if for no other reason than to attract people to their print publications. But some of them during the pandemic shifted to totally online. Some of them aren't coming back. The only problem, of course, with being online is how to monetize it. How do you make money, pay your staff, pay your contributors, pay your suppliers, your printers, if you still got a print magazine, and get the word out there, because it can be quite difficult to be discovered if you're online only. So that's the main thing.
What do you think?
So prior to the pandemic, we were seeing a growth in independent publications at Hemlock, and we have sales in the U.S. and in Canada. And our U.S. sales our growth in the U.S. has been driven a lot by that category of independent publications, and this is prior to the pandemic. And what we found, and it's a tough business, obviously, because it's high cost, but these publications are kind of a different type, either low or no advertising, sold through e-commerce or through small shops, retail channels, and that was a growth pattern through years, maybe say 5 or 6 years prior to the pandemic. We did find it just sustained itself. So a lot of the magazines that we were printing continued, and some grew. So we've been really, excited by this category of really high, content, high design, a lot of photography, color, mixed materials, mixed substrates, kind of a real experiential type thing. And it's still a challenging business model, but we found it more growing during the pandemic and continuing to grow. But it's very niche. It's a niche aspect. Could be very specialized content around certain niche communities, sports or cars or culture, fashion, those kinds of things. So that's been our experience, which has been quite exciting for us. Yeah.
So sourdough bread and beautiful books and magazines.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of pretty pictures, but at the same time, a lot too on the content side too. So it's not just something that looks good. It's there's some really good content as well. So it's a bit of a unique area for us, for sure. And then one other thing, we see that some companies are using the book format or a publication format in order to use that content as a brand vehicle. So we're seeing, like we do work, say, for example, an e-commerce grocery delivery type business in the States. They are giving away cookbooks as part of their promotions or part of their sign-up process. So we've done the 10th reprint on a cookbook that is specific to that company, right? So businesses are using publications as a brand vehicle, what we're finding, which is sort of interesting as well.
Okay. Yeah, for us, I would say books didn't really, what we were publishing and sort of the numbers that we were publishing didn't change that much, but we are so dependent on sort of a community of magazines and media people and bookstores, the large one, the Indigos and the smaller independents for discoverability. And when the pandemic came along, all of a sudden we just had to completely shift and say, okay, like how are people going to find our books? We at Harbor Publishing, for sure, we publish a lot of books that are more focused on kind of rural issues, less in the cities. And I think like the first month or two of the pandemic, with ad revenue disappearing, I think something like 40% of small papers in BC had to shut down, and that was a major part of sort of, you know, getting our books out there. So so it was a major shift in like, okay, how do we reach people? And I think a lot of what happened was, or it could be positive in the future, we don't really know yet. Like I see a lot of focus on the local and sort of supporting local business, and that's great. But it happened a little quickly. And so, you know, I don't think any of us slept for a couple months there trying to make sure that, you know, everything was happening. So.
Yeah, so much has shifted in many ways. And I just wanted to channel Don here because he did, he couldn't make it today, but he did provide some insights, written comments that he would like to add. And of course, Don Gorman, for those who don't know him, he's 35 plus year veteran in publishing, and he's with Rocky Mountain Books at the moment. He's a publisher for them. And when I asked him these questions, he did give me some feedback on it, and I thought I'd share them with you. So on the question of major shifts, and he says, I don't know his voice, but I imagine it's deeper than mine. The increase in online sales has had a profound impact on books publishing. So he's seeing that difference. Online sales has had a profound impact on book publishing and book selling. During the height of the pandemic, I created a Google map that highlighted Canada's indie bookstores willing to deliver books from their closed stores. The initiative garnered over 620,000 views and received coverage from various news sources in both Canada and the US, which underscores the significance of indie bookstores and their enduring love for books, especially during troubled times. That's actually very hard.
That map was fantastic. And I'll just say that sort of inspired by that map, Book Manager, which is sort of runs software for the book industry, started it like it's the simplest little thing. It's called the Read Local button. And it on websites or anywhere, it's just a little like website that you can put an ISBN of your book into, and all the website will recognize where the person viewing the website lives, and will see all the places that your book or whatever book the ISBN is available at independent bookstores. So I live in Calgary. I click on this button. I'm looking for a book, Reuniting with Strangers, and it will show me Shelf Life has 2 books, you know, Pages on Kensington has 3 books. And during the pandemic, that was really great to be able to, because all those places were, you know, delivering and doing online sales. So it sort of got the booksellers online. So you didn't have to order from Amazon, you could order from indies, which was nice.
Support indie bookstores. So on the subject of like what's shifted, I'm curious, have you seen a shift in interest of subject matter since the pandemic from before, or is it like a pretty steady diet that you've been right across the board?
There's been a bit of a spike, although I think it's now getting back to normal during the pandemic. And you can say whether this fits you guys as well or not, of nesting, what I call nesting activities, gardening, baking, bread. Don't get me started on bread. Crafts, renovation. Even now, I think renovation's a big deal because they were at home. You're stuck at home for a year. You figured out, things need to change, and that sort of thing. So there was definitely an uptick in that. I think it's sort of starting to go back down again, as evidenced by all the bread making machines now on. I don't know, Craigslist or whatever, but there was definitely a bump there. And certainly niche magazines and things like that, they've always been a little bit more resistant to problems than others because people are already interested in what they have to offer, unlike, say, consumer magazines, which with the changes, especially like tourism travel magazines, their advertisers are restaurants. Pick which ones might be affected by COVID: restaurants, hotels, airlines, tourism companies, You know, yeah, so really get hit hard. And same thing with a lot of consumer mags. So I mean, and with the shrinkage of newsstands as well, that's been really impacting our industry and gives the reading habits, purchasing habits, problems because the remaining newsstand space left goes to those high performing titles, many of whom are U.S. titles or international titles, Vogue, Cosmo, you know, Snow Rider, whatever you want, the sort of really high return, and because they want to make a living as well, they want to have those ones that perform. So there's less risk taking in what they stock, and then that affects reading habits because you can't find what you're looking for. So there's less sort of purchasing being done of magazines that meet your interests because it's just not there. How do you find that with books? Did you find that with books as well?
I think books are so much slower than magazines. Maybe publishers are too, I don't know. But I think the pandemic really highlighted a lot of issues with inequality within sort of society. And there's also sort of that almost adrenaline with sort of everything that was so stressful going on. And I think I think it's been a good thing in some ways because I think there was a renewed passion in sort of getting out these books that are just really important for the healing of society. And I think the pandemic was very polarizing and sort of people became more passionate in terms of getting those really important stories out. I think there's just a lot of energy put into that. People were at home more. They were sort of reevaluating, both people that work in the industry and sort of society in general, sort of how they live, and new ways of living became part of the sort of zeitgeist. So I think we are publishing more books that sort of have a purpose to change the way that we are in society and to sort of fix some of those inequalities.
That's very interesting, and that's very heartening. We have a yes.
While you're on the pandemic
Sure.
stuff, was there any change in the trends of like digital versus physical book? Like, was because of the pandemic, did more people buy ebooks or physical books because they were at home and wanted the physical thing, or no change at all?
So ebooks, for some reason, have been like the big thing. No, there's not really been any change in ebooks at all. Where we are seeing big spikes is audiobooks. Maybe all those people, embroidering and doing crafts and wanting to listen to
Nesting. Listen to something about nesting.
But no, I think audiobooks have definitely seen a fairly steady growth. But ebooks, no, they kind of steadily go along. So,
Well, that's interesting. So since we're on audiobooks, what trend is that? Is it mostly people who are reading fiction or self-help guides, or what kind of ebooks? Sorry, audiobooks.
Oh, I will back up for a second. So with ebooks, genre ebooks have increased quite a bit, but as far as our business is concerned, it's been steady. Audiobooks, kind of everything. I think there's been a lot. Working from home, I think technology has really come a long way. I think there's been a lot of a huge push for accessibility. The federal government gave the publishing industry quite a bit of money to make sure that books were accessible, and a lot of that is being able to listen. So I think a lot of publishers were really started looking at audiobooks a lot more seriously. A lot of the associations got funding to sort of produce audiobooks for publishers. So it's been an exciting area that we've all been kind of interested to go into. That funding is now over. So it will be interesting to see if if small independent publishers can still produce those audiobooks, because it's not our specialty, right? Like, we're used to working with with printers. So we'll see. But I love a good audiobook.
Thanks for that question. So maybe pulling us back to the print for a minute, I want to touch on the cost of printing. Of course, we all know that cost of paper, everything, glue, probably everything has gone up. Inflation. How has that affected your specific areas? And Richard is nodding a lot because I
Yeah.
think you're deep in the thick of it, right? With like
Yeah.
producing,
We have to buy a lot of it.
you have to buy a lot
Yeah,
of it.
so-
So I like actually I was wondering, does that affect like are books getting shorter or you know, are there
That's a
fewer
good idea.
pictures or you know, like just to lower the cost of printing? Is there a pressure on
Yeah.
authors to not include photographs, for example, just to make
Well,
it
I think it's in this conversation, I'm kind of having fairly narrow view because we're the supplier and I'm kind of looking at our pool of customers and servicing that need. So, and we're very, of course, biased towards producing a hard copy thing rather than convincing our clients to go to the ebooks or something like that. And pretty much everything we print, with the exception of some books, is more pictorial or historic or, you know, like hobby or, you know, something that requires graphics. But the cost of paper over 21, 22, so not 20, because that's when the supply chain sort of things shut down. Then things started to pick up again to a degree. A lot of people at home wanting to order books. There was that big crunch for paper. And then the supply chain got totally disrupted, as we all heard about. There wasn't material coming from offshore, which supplies a good percentage of the paper supply in North America, which put all this pressure on the North American providers. And so we were dealing with massive shortages, long waits, and upwards of 40+% increases in paper costs. So then we passed that along to our clients, and that made, in some cases, clients have to reduce their quantities, and we just had to get creative. But now it's beginning to settle down a little bit. So the offshore supply is starting to come back. The inventory levels in North America are increasing. So it's beginning to settle down. But that's kind of happening at the same time as there's a growth in our clients' independent publications. So there's a stronger interest in hard copy printed things just in general. And so while we're managing paper costs, we're also seeing an increase in demand for that kind of product. So, you know, that's in our world. That might not be in the wider publishing world, but in our world, because we produce high quality color, that type of stuff, we're seeing an increase. And the one thing at Hemlock, we've added on the distribution side. So we have a warehouse where we ship things on demand. So we have a bit of an e-commerce linkage to our service. So that's been kind of helping us, I think. But I think that's going to correct itself. It's really a shorter term problem.
it's a pinch point.
Yeah, there's basically the demand exceeded the supply, and now the crazy thing is the merchants who we buy from have excessive inventories because they basically bought as much as they could get, and then but there was a long delay, sort of like the toilet paper
Yes.
situation. There was a long delay in that coming in. So particularly the offshore stuff has come in a big way, and there was all this ordering and hoarding going on, including printers. And there's massive inventories now of paper. So if you hear printers or suppliers saying there's a shortage, they're lying.
Ah, the insider tip.
That's right. I mean,
That's
there's
interesting.
certain, of course, sort of weights and grades,
Sure.
and it's not just an exact balance
Actually,
on
I
that.
see
But
that you have a few magazines there that are part of the Federation's
yeah,
WordWorks.
I got some samples.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I
So,
don't know if you can hold up a few. They are
Yeah.
beautiful. I think they're beautifully produced, and
here we go.
yeah.
Show and tell.
yeah, show
Yeah.
and tell for sure.
Yeah.
But so from the author's perspective, like someone who wants to have their book independently published, for example,
Yeah.
is it
so-
a order and then like just
On
in time-
demand.
on
Yeah, I would say
demand?
the technology is definitely moving in the direction of unit costs coming down on shorter quantities.
Mhm.
So digitally produced books are getting more and more possible. So we just invested in an Indigo, Hewlett Packard Indigo, big press, and it produces upwards of, say, 1,500 quantities more competitively than a traditional offset press. So still very small quantities, but it's very, very automated, and there's really no waste in contrast to more of a traditional press. So I would say over the next 5 to 10 years, the cost of producing small quantities is going to come down and down and down. And especially as things get more efficient, where things can get produced as they're needed and shipped as they're needed. I do think that is definitely going to be happening more and more. We're certainly, working to build ourselves in that kind of model.
So I've noticed that the cost of books, I mean, this is from the consumer, like readers side. I love books, so I buy lots of books, and I've noticed that the costs are creeping up, but kind of all of a sudden and recently. For a long time, they were like, soft cover tended to be like, $19.99 type of range, and then lately I've noticed they're kind of in the mid 20s range, 25. Even actually.
That's probably, I would guess that's paper related. Just general cost of
Right.
producing things is much higher right now,
Mm,
and hopefully that comes down. But it's like it took a couple years for that supply
There was a
crunch
lag,
to
right?
occur.
Yeah.
It's going to take a couple years for the supply
right.
to become more stable.
I would say there's certain unnamed retailers that have really kept the price artificially low for a very long time.
Mm.
And with paper going up, I think publishers just couldn't
Yeah.
that we were going into negative margins. So I think it's just been so low for so long that we don't want to go too crazy and raise prices, but I would say they're artificially low for sure. The margins
That's-
are tiny. So
Yeah, I wondered about that. On the magazine side, Sylvia, have you seen have the smaller magazines or the lesser well-known ones have they had a really big hit during this time?
All print magazines have. We're not small to large. It doesn't matter. It's got to do with percentage of money it takes to publish a magazine. As you know, the longer lead times you need, which means problems in terms of staffing, getting content done in time for the print runs, and the layout and so on. And also, some of our legacy publications, they've reduced the number of magazines per year, the frequency. And then they try and make up for a little bit by having more in the remaining issues. The problem with that is if you're not super careful, you suddenly run afoul of postal rates. Even if you're doing publications mail, if you've got a heavier magazine, you're going to pay more in sending it out. And Canada Post, from what I understand from one of my publishers, always increases their rates every year. Even during the pandemic, they raise their rates. So from what I understand, you're welcome to tell me I'm wrong. But so, you get double hits. You get, you're doing it less frequently. Subscribers think of it as less of a value proposition if you're not sending out your magazine as frequently, even if you might have more pages in the remaining ones, and then the cost of postage as well. And yeah, it's hit everybody.
Well, that's really good insight for the writer who's, as a writer is still sort of in an emerging space. I feel like, often I submit to things and it feels like there's even less response than there used to be. And I think it's, I want us to leave this to the end, but we may as well go there. The monster of AI, chatbots and everything. I think writers are competing with, just AI that's generating stuff so quickly. I'm wondering from submissions perspective whether this is probably more a question to you, Annie and Sylvia, whether you've noticed a lot more influx of submissions, and how are you dealing with so much more stuff coming in, and how are there criteria being set to weed out AI, or are they being included? Serenaded.
Should we break into song?
Yeah, perhaps.
But is that real?
Is it right on cue? Maybe we're saying things we shouldn't be.
At least we all hear it.
Not yet. I think that I mean, it's worrisome. I think, I mean, we want more than anything for writers to get fairly paid for their work. That's fairly clear. I think that as a smaller independent publishers, you know the community so well. You know, I think that a lot of the books we publish, you know, is just information that is not on the internet that the AI bots are not going to publish. You know, all the little inlets of the BC coast and that sort of thing. Like, the bots don't know about those places. So I think for our companies in particular, I think we've been a little bit immune from it so far, though we have noticed some of our authors that we've signed already writing books a little bit faster. So I don't know.
The productivity's
No pressure, everyone.
notably different. Yeah.
So we haven't. I think it's a little too early at this point to know for sure. But it's something that we're. I don't know. I'm very curious. I'm curious to see what happens.
Sylvia, did you have anything to add on the magazine side?
Very different on the magazine
Very-
side.
okay.
Yeah, I went to the FIP 2023 International Magazine Media Conference in June. They had 6 or 7 sessions on AI content. And the 2 I went to, I figured 2 was enough, but who knows, was that it's here to stay. It's a tool. Use it if you want to use it, especially for those articles such as short news items. News magazines and newspapers are looking at it very closely for serving when it's just facts. You just collect the facts. You have someone check it to make sure it's correct. Out, right? And then potentially to free your writers and journalists to do the more in-depth investigative journalism and articles. That's theoretically. There was a magazine crew that famously or infamously, depending on your point of view, created a whole magazine with just AI. Just AI. And
As an
so,
experiment, sort of jump in.
yeah,
As an
yeah,
experiment. Oh.
Yeah, just to see if it could happen, what it would look like, what the tone might be, what, how good the writing was, how engaging it was, and so on. Obviously, for some publications like arts and literary magazines, having people generate and submit creative content is problematic. Using AI is problematic, but there are also online tools to, if you're not sure, to check and see if this is in fact AI generated. In fact, I know of a particular situation with one of our member magazines that a contributor contributed an article and they decided not to work with that person anymore because it was AI generated, even though they had done it once before and they told them not to. So it's already there. It's all, people already see it as kind of a shortcut, and that's just how it is. One of the speakers at FIP did say you should have a policy and guidelines around AI generated content. Post it, talk about it, figure out what's useful, permissible, and what's not, depending on whether you're a book publisher, magazine publisher, newspaper, what have you. Have policy, have guidelines, and so editorial staff can just quit, and tools such as those AI analyzers, online AI content analyzers, so that they can quickly go through and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, in terms of approving content or knowing what it is. So it's a thing. It's a fait accompli in my industry.
I think so too. The genie is out of the bottle.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I probably speak on behalf of lots of writers. Oh, hi, Janie.
Just curious, are you seeing an uptick in agencies or publishing contracts that specify the work cannot be AI or be fed to an AI training database, or that audiobooks need to be narrated by humans? Is anything legal in the legal language happening?
That's a good question. Not that I'm aware of. It's not really my. I'm not sure I'm specialized enough to answer. It hasn't been a huge concern for us just because of the types of books that we publish. So on our side, not yet, but I think industry wide, I think it's something that's being talked about a lot more. And I think yeah, guidelines are always great.
You can definitely, like on the audio side, you could see it being moving to automatically generated audio because it's simulating voices and all kinds of stuff. I could see that being an area where that's going to be applied in the near term because that's a big cost, I'm sure, to produce that kind of stuff.
I think you can still. I don't like
You can
robot voices at the moment,
Yeah.
but they might get a lot
They're
better.
getting-
Yeah.
think they
they are
will.
getting better, and I think it's a race for regulation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think if artists wish to get compensated properly, it's I think it's something that we all have to deal with. Actually, there's been some copyright
Hmm.
cases. Can't quote them right now, but I think it's already started. People are upset about their work being ripped off by chatbots, basically,
Yeah.
and with no credit or compensation given. So I think we're in that space already.
One of the promising areas actually is translations. Taking an audio file and translating it into a script in a different language. Apparently, it's actually, I wouldn't depend on it totally because I'm a skeptic, but if you can get like 97% of the way there and get somebody who's a human translator to tweak out the nuances, as we all know. Traduttore, traduttore. The translator is a traitor. But anyway, it's an old Italian phrase. But anyways, but yeah, it may be helpful in terms of accessing international lit. Making it more
Hmm.
affordable.
Yeah.
As I said, with the involvement of somebody who actually has deep understanding of the various languages, to make it available to different cultures and people.
So just we have a question in the audience, but Richard, I was wondering from the the independent publisher perspective, is that a concern that you have to grapple with too? Like, do you have to try and verify that the stuff that you're getting from clients are not?
It's more on the copyright side, but that responsibility falls on the publisher, on the client.
on the client.
Yeah. So we haven't really, but we have it on deck to create some AI guidelines or policy for ourselves, but that's more internal around the use of it, and where are the parameters where we have more like where do we have issues with it, because for sure it's already being used in our workplace. There's no doubt. Yeah.
Okay. We have a.
I was just going to comment on the AI and the voiceover. That's one of the things that the Screen Actors Guild is fighting very
Right.
strongly for
Of
right
course,
now
yeah.
during their strike, because it's like an important part of their income to do
Mhm.
work like that and having that kind of stuff happen, and the writers as well. So yeah,
It's
AI is definitely scary.
Translation, that point around translation, I could see it being a significant, but also an enabling thing.
Yeah.
There's a jobs protection aspect, which is going to affect so many industries, including ours as well, right?
Right.
On the production side and the office side. Yeah.
Well, I just had a couple more questions before we open it up again for audience participation, I guess, Q&A. And that's maybe on the more optimistic side. What's selling? What do you see as like trends going forward? What do you see is going out the door? What are people interested in? Subjects, genres. Actually, Don had something to say about this. He said, we'll continue to see a rise in sales of genre fiction and kids' books, along with other types of stories that can help readers escape the difficult aspects of our day-to-day lives. I also really hope that we'll continue to experience a renaissance in published work from communities and writers that are traditionally underrepresented. As I think Annie touched on, that I think we're in that moment where I think it is maybe, it's, as a BIPOC author, I think I'm a little bit heartened that the door has been opened a crack, and there are some invitations out there for diverse stories. So that's great. And he says also, with so many platforms available to writers, publishers, and readers, I'm excited to see how things evolve and how we all decide to take advantage of the opportunities that are afforded to us moving forward. So I think, Don has a note of optimism here. How do the rest of you feel?
I'm optimistic. You have to, I mean, you have to be. You'd see all these great manuscripts coming across your desk, and even the ones that we don't necessarily publish or, recommend to another publisher. I don't know. I'm reading 3 books right now, and I all 3 of them are like my favorite book ever. You can't. You have to love them.
So
So I'm
I don't know if you're you don't print children's books, right?
We do,
You
yeah.
do. Okay.
Yeah, we do
Okay.
some.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think there's we have a steady stream of children's books. I have a son, so I'm paying a lot more attention to our kids' books. I think one area that I would love to see is like grades 1 to 3 chapter books. I feel like that's an underserviced market at the moment. So that's
grades 1 to 3,
and maybe
is
that's
ages
like
6
6
to
to
9,
8, 6 to
6 to
9, sort of early grade chapter books. And that's maybe selfish because I want more books to read to my son. But
but they tend
yeah.
to be picture books too, right?
there's a lot. Picture books are so beautiful, and the art is so beautiful, and that's great. And I want to keep on seeing those because I love them. But just like the straight book, like chapter book, no illustrations, just words for younger kids.
There you go. There might be a market out there for the young children's lit writers out there. Would either of you like to comment on like the trends that you see selling or what's coming into your inboxes?
Well, I mean, I'm not in the actual publishing business, so I can only see what the stats are. I mean, 70% of Canadian titles are still magazine titles are still consumer publications, but the magazines that tend to do the best are niche publications, particular interests, whether it be astronomy or trains or gardening. Garden is a big one, that sort of thing, because you've got people who are passionate about that topic and are more likely to be loyal subscribers. You want subscribers or memberships, like one of our member magazines, Digits and Threads, is online only, but they have a membership model, so you get access to more knowledge, articles, tips, etc. So there's that sort of value in terms of selling your content, and also things like business to business magazines, because, and again, through subscriptions and advertising, because if you're doing something like Tow Canada, which is a local magazine, you have the towing industry advertisers who want to have ads in your publication, and the ancillary organizations and companies as well. And the towing industry people want your magazine because it gives them tips and keeps them up to date and things like that. So business to business kinds of magazines are also a lot less vulnerable as a whole to problems in the industry. There are also cases where you get a particular magazine that's got a kind of the sweet spot, and I'm going to bring this up because again I found this out at FIP. It's called Marlin magazine. Marlin is a kind of fish. It's one of these jumping fish, and it's very, very sort of dramatic looking. It's deep sea. It's all things. And people who fish for marlin have deep pockets. Great. So you've got people who are subscribers, well off. So what they do is they don't just have a magazine. They have TV programs. They have expeditions. They've got fishing tournaments that were up to $10 million. These fishing tournaments.
I have to get into
prices.
fishing.
Yeah, fish. Strangely enough,
Oh.
fishing it's a big deal. We've got a local fishing magazine that does very much similar things. Another thing that I don't think enough of our magazines are really getting into, as who should, especially those that have evergreen content, are bookazines. You plumb the depths of your content from the past. You have a theme, and you put it in a book.
Yes. We're seeing that kind of thing.
Yeah, and because you pay less for content, it's already there. You see it if you go by a newsstand tonight. Count how many bookazines are on there, and I'll call bookazines the ones that say 50 years, John Lennon, Life and Times, Madonna, or things like that. Like it can be personalities, it can be the top the top recipes from Good Housekeeping over the last 10 years. It could be, so they bundle this stuff up. They've already paid for it, depending on the contract, as you know, depends on how much more they can pay for it. But it's sort of really an easy sell. And if people feel it's a keepable thing. It's also a memento item so that you can go in, let's say Train Spotting Quarterly. I don't even know if this is a magazine, but Train Spotting Quarterly decides that they want to have, the 30, most classic trains of the past 100 years and where to spot them. Well, everybody's going to keep that. Everybody who's interested in trains is going to keep that. So it's just a sort of add-on, and I'm going to have Richard speak to how that works. And finally, one of the things that I'm seeing a bit more of is kind of something, again, like a bookazine that's straddling books and magazines, which is almost a bespoke magazine. I've been seeing magazines that are very expensive, but very beautiful. And you look at them and go, I want this thing. It's much more sort of, it's got beautiful paper and it's got beautiful
I brought one.
photography.
You brought one.
oh,
Great.
oh.
I love
Thank
the
you,
show and
Richard.
tell aspect, Richard.
We
Thank you.
planned this in advance.
Oh my God, I
Really,
should
we
probably
did.
grab one. Yeah, so
Anyways,
this
um,
is sort of the example. This
Oh,
is
that
just
is
one,
pretty.
but
perfect.
but
Okay.
yeah, lots of
So-
color, really beautifully designed.
So sorry.
Very little advertising.
On the creative
any.
side, who's funding all this? That's got to be a huge cost, right? To print that. So
Yeah, this is a sort of science, culture, politics. Like it's basically essays. It's this collection of essays, but they're very graphically, graphic rich in terms of the presentation. But that's a called the Berggruen Institute, I think is the end client, which is basically like a nonprofit that has a mission to accelerate thought leadership and that kind of thing, right? So they use a print magazine and then they have a companion website to kind of push that content out. And I think there's in the quantity of sort of 5,000 to 10,000.
yeah, that's pretty gorgeous. I would keep that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
So
so,
bespoke magazine.
yeah,
Yeah.
Richard can talk more about that part,
Mhm.
but just to sort of finish off what I was saying and what you were asking about, it helps if you're a nonprofit, although you can get funding from Canada Periodical Fund, even if you're a for-profit magazine, if you meet their eligibility requirements, depending. Canada Council for the Arts, Arts and Culture Literary Magazines, BC Arts Council, Access Copyright Foundation has funding for individuals and organizations, and City of Vancouver has some as well. So there are, depending on what kind of magazine you are, there are more or fewer grants for you. Something like this that maybe intersects science and art and culture, well, you'd be all over it. You'd go to Canada Council for the Arts, but you'd also probably, if it were in Canada, but then you'd also turn around and go to the Science and Technology Ministry and say, hey, we're doing this, which is like, these are our goals. Do you have a program that fits something like this for the advancement of science education, et cetera, et cetera? So if you've got that overlap, that's certainly that can be an advantage as well. So what you're saying about high end?
Well, just like in terms of like, am I feeling optimistic? I definitely, one really encouraging thing, because it's a family business. So my dad started the company in the 60s, and then, growing up in it, it's all really exciting and seeing how things are made. But then of course I was in university in the 90s, and then leading into that, there was obviously the dot-com boom. And I was sort of thinking, am I stepping in an industry that's essentially going to be irrelevant in a few years? So I've always had that sort of thought, but at the same time, Hemlock has adapted and shifted and morphed, and we print things at the best to of our ability with the best technology we can. And it's interesting to see magazines, which you think would be really a challenge, are quite resilient, in terms of, and books, right? And like one example is like alumni magazines for universities. I was out for dinner with one of our clients in Seattle at a university, and they spent a lot of time and effort on a very interactive website that's basically flopped. There's no engagement on the website at all, right? And that all of the people, the alumni, it's not like they're sort of non-tech, and they just don't want to look at a website to learn about the school. They'd rather, it's more of it's a service. Like they are curating delivering this experience and content to update them on. And they're a community. That's a community that has a particular interest in the school. So it's really interesting kind of takeaway, and we're seeing that all over in lots of different categories. And the other kind of exciting thing for us right now is magazines, including short run. It's like an art, it's a craft, and young people are looking at it as a, like my kid just went to university and she's all excited about getting a record player, which seems really strange. Apparently everyone has record players on her floor, right? So it's more like print is like an expression right now for young people as well, because it's not digital. So, and we're seeing all kinds of crazy, like all typography rules, all design rules broken in print. I could barely read it. We have no idea what's going on in it, but the kids, this is the design they want. They want to, challenge the mold and all that kind of thing, right? So it's really exciting to see print used in that way. And the biggest thing there, in order to make them viable, because they might run 2,500 and not know exactly how they're going to sell them, right? Which happens in many cases, is the distribution of it, keeping that cost down and having an ability to sell that through e-commerce and not relying on physical retail like an Indigo. If you're relying on physical retail, I think the model long-term is going to be, you need both. You need an e-com, your own direct e-com, not someone else's e-com, ideally. So we're seeing a lot of that. And if they can build a strong community online, on social media, and on their website, and then they've got that following, hey, new issue coming out, or pre-sell. There's some of our clients have pre-sold the issue before they've even printed it, which funds the production of the issue. So there's all kinds of
Kickstarter type situation.
Not just Kickstarter, but their own. Like once they have that following, they're saying, basically pre-order this next issue, and this is the theme. So it's not like, maybe quarterly, but they're saying the theme in the next quarter is this, and it's this topic, and pre-order now, and then they use the pre-orders to pay for the print costs, right? So I think the exciting thing there is that there's a community that wants to buy that and does not look at the online piece as a replacement. It's more like, I use the online to tell my community when the print's coming out, So, and there's all kinds of, some of these, like this is well funded. I don't know whether they're making a lot of money on it, but they're using it as a way to get their message out, right? So, and others are, bootstrapping it, and entrepreneurs trying to figure it out. And so, I'm definitely optimistic as a printer, seeing that emergence, So
That's great.
Yeah.
What I'm learning today, thank you all so much, is that there's a lot of adaptation and evolution in the publishing world. And I think there are new and interesting opportunities being created for authors as well. So that's good. Alongside, of course, lots and lots of challenges, but I think that's probably always been the case for artists. I'm going to open it up to audience. Does anyone have a question for our panel of traditional magazine independent publishing? We've already had some great questions. Does anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share? Yeah, I think it's the last event of the day, so maybe we're all pretty tired. Do you have questions for each other? I think, it's such an interesting, like a mix of expertise and.
I have a question for the audience. If you had to choose, what book or magazine would you love to have published? Like you're just looking for it, but you can't find it.
Oh, wow.
Does anyone have any ideas?
Good idea. Writer's Digest, Canadian version.
Okay.
Spoken like a real author.
An updated Canadian Oxford Dictionary.
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
Yeah,
That would be
that
good.
be nice with
Yeah.
Canadian spelling.
Exactly, yes.
I don't know. I love the idea of like magazines with like illustrations for adults. Like I don't
Yeah.
know. I see so often like stuff for kids, but I don't know. I love line drawings, for example, and I don't know. I think there's a huge art to it, and it can be so beautifully done in a very simple style, and I haven't been able to find that very much. Yeah, I don't know. What about you? What would you like to see out there?
Well, me, I'm a totally practical person. What I'd love to see is just a couple of books, one on straightforward gardening by the month in Vancouver, like an urban gardening by the month, like what you can do, what you can't do with limited time and effort.
That'd only
and so
be
on.
a 6 months. Run.
Yeah,
I'm just
well,
kidding. No, I'm kidding. Not
maybe
run,
8.
but maybe 8.
Yeah.
You know, supply chain issues of paper. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gotta-
right,
September
That's
to
right.
December,
That's right.
fallow. No, I'm just kidding.
that sort of thing.
No,
So-
but that would be actually really interesting, right? Like,
And also just maybe a local food. Like one thing I have come across is just that I've been, and maybe there are books out there, but I just haven't come across them. Is how to shift your diet to becoming a vegetarian and having actual food plans and shopping lists as you go, and you step through the transitioning, because there's weekly plans, but then you have to turn around and do shopping lists, and there's individual recipes, but there's not like a way to eat more healthily and et cetera, et cetera. So
Hi.
As my mother-in-law and my grandmother aged, I found that there wasn't a lot of novels that are like adult themed but written more simply so that they can
Mm.
track the
Ooh.
plot.
Mhm.
And I
Yes.
just searched and searched, and there really isn't very much unless you're, so I'm thinking, I might have to write that.
Write it. I
You know,
think
there are puzzles that are
Yeah.
paper pieces, matte colored, matte and with lots of different designs that are easy to detect for older adults. But there aren't a lot of books that are proper adult books. but that
I
are written more
completely-
simply.
It's a good
I
one.
completely agree with that, because I
That's
was
fair.
looking for something on Amazon, unfortunately, because I couldn't
we
find
all
anything
do.
in the
We
indie.
all do.
I know, and I couldn't. I just wanted to find something that was literary, but with a simplified plot line. I think is what you're saying as well, right? For like
Mhm.
people with memory problems. So definitely shorter stories. And everything I found for adults was like kind of condescending and
Yes,
insulting.
exactly. That's what I think
Mm.
Yeah, I think you should write that book.
And what happened to the whole list of characters at the beginning of the book? I mean, I'm like
Mhm.
2/3 of the way through the book. They
The
mentioned
map. Yeah.
the character in like the first 5 pages, and then they don't mention them until 100 pages in. You're going, who is this person?
Yeah.
I haven't. Sorry.
Maybe a magazine that combines upcycling and budget recipes
Mm.
that are not complicated and stuff you have on hand. You don't have to do a lot of complicated shopping for ingredients to garden.
You bet.
Especially in this day and age of people struggling to make ends meet, this sort of thing. How to, because you still have to buy stuff to make that stuff happen, which helps them with advertising, but just to be creative, but to also be budget friendly.
So the comment from the audience, in case people didn't catch that, is what a great idea! A magazine of upcycling existing or creative ways to use materials or ingredients that you already have on hand. Right? That's a really good idea. Hi.
Just to comment on the adult reading, there is a publisher in BC that publishes Prince books, and there are authors who specifically write books for adult literacy programs. So they are stories that are meant for adults, but the words are easier and the plots are easier to follow. So maybe that's. And I'm sorry, I absolutely cannot remember who the publisher is.
I can't remember the publisher, but I know Barbara Kinsel. I think Barbara,
No.
not Barbara Kinsel, but Gail Anderson. She writes some of those books for that publisher, I believe.
And there's a BC author who does that too.
Yeah.
And I'm so sure it's a BC publisher.
Yeah, I think it is, but there just isn't very much. Yeah.
Adult literacy.
It's
Yeah,
not
I think-
literacy exactly, it's not to learn how to read.
I know,
it's
yeah, but
for,
it's but it's targeting people, adults who are learning to read.
Yeah, I think there's a niche market for it. But yes, and I think we're just coming up on 4. So I want to thank our lovely panel today. Sylvia, Richard, Annie, thank you very much for being here. And thanks to all of you for being here and spending an hour with us, learning
Thank
about
you.
the trends in publishing. So thanks.
And have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.